Hi everybody! Today we're going to be working in another Colouring Heaven magazine, and this one is the Dark Fantasy Special by Enys Guerrero. And I've had a work in progress in this magazine for absolutely ages, I think at least a couple of years now. And I figure, seeing as my theme this month is mushrooms, then this one would be an ideal one to colour actually on camera, show you how I colour mushrooms and my colour combination for mushrooms. Apparently my colouring style has changed a little bit since I started this WIP because I couldn't get my mushrooms to look exactly right, but I've got them looking pretty much the same, so I figure I'll show you how I was doing that. Just as a little note before we do zoom in and start the actual colouring, Enys Guerrero is a pretty dark kind of gothic sort of colouring artist, and she does like to draw scars onto her girls. There is a tiny one there on that little lady on the cover there, and the lady that I am colouring does have a couple of scars on her arms. I've tried my best to cover them up with sticky notes, little sticky tags, just a little warning for people. I'll show you the image that we're going to be working on. This is the image that we are going to be working on, and I figured, as you can see, there is a lot of mushrooms here. Toadstools, fungus, whatever you want to call it. For the sake of the video, I'm going to be calling them mushrooms, mainly because that's just what I call them whenever I'm colouring them, anything like this. And this is the way that I do like to colour my mushrooms. And I really did forget how much I do love colouring mushrooms because originally, I might pop up the WIP here. And originally there was just a few of the mushroom caps actually coloured in. And I was putting off going back to this one because it's just a heck of a lot of mushrooms. But when I did first start colouring this in, I think it was when I first got my very first set of markers, I didn't really have a lot of colours in there, and I wasn't really as experienced as I am now with using the markers. So I was fixing on colouring the whole page pretty much just with coloured pencils. When I picked it back up again, I did actually go in with markers to base the rest of the background here with the leaves. And I worked on top of that with the coloured pencils, and that was working really pretty quick, considering how slow it was going with the coloured pencils. I left the mushrooms just doing those with the pencils, and yeah, I forgot how much I love colouring mushrooms because once I got started, I didn't want to stop, and I had to leave it so that I would have some to actually colour on film. And I was figuring to maybe colour some of this area here on film so you can see the colour combination I was using. And these ones, the original ones that I coloured, you can see they are slightly less vibrant. These are the ones that I went into again and worked more recently. They seem to be a little bit more vibrant, and I don't know if that's because I was blending these with the white Arteza pencil, whereas nowadays I use the Polychromos, which is a lot harder pencil. So I was thinking maybe these have got a little bit of wax bloom on them or something. I don't know, but something really wasn't making these as vibrant as my newest ones. So I've tried to match up as best I could. You can still see a slight difference, but not enough to really make a lot of difference, I hope. And my blending technique has changed a lot, I think. I was using a lot more layers back here and really filling up the tooth of the paper before going into blend. So I will show you how I was going about that. I think I figured out how I was originally going about that. And if we do have time, I will show you how I was doing the background and the mushroom stalks as well. But enough of me rabbiting on now. I will zoom us in and we'll look at this area here, and I'll show you how I have been colouring these mushrooms. Okay, hopefully I've got us in close enough, near enough to the middle there, so you can actually see what I have been doing. And first of all, I'll show you the markers that I have been using for the little bit of basing that I was getting done there. And the first one for the mushroom stems, this is WG01, called Warm Grey 1. These are the Ohuhu markers. And with the WG01, I was colouring the mushroom stems. I'm not entirely sure if they do have a different name in mushroomology, but yeah, the stems or the stalk of the mushroom I was doing with this Warm Grey 01, and it does dry a little bit lighter than it does when you originally put it down. And I was colouring the underside of the caps here. I was also doing that with the WG01. The caps or the top of the mushroom, I was leaving those just with the pencil because that's what I had been doing, or that's what I thought I had been doing. And I wanted to keep it as similar to my original kind of colouring as possible, even though I don't think I've quite matched the colours. But I wanted to keep it as close as possible. I'll just finish colouring these stems here. In some places it's a little bit hard to tell what is stem, what is mushroom, what is background. So a couple of places I did have to stop and try and figure that out. But I think we've got something that's looking somewhat as if it could be a background of mushrooms. So yeah, we will go with that. There we go. There is a few more up the top there, but I'll go on to those as I get onto them. And for the background, I was using the deep cream, which is Y203. And I find that to be a quite good background for if I'm going to be using green. Probably not a colour that everybody would use, but I was using it just to go over the whole of the background. And anytime these leaves do pop over the kind of cap of the mushroom, I was colouring those as well, just all the leaves and the background. Whereas here we've got just background. And I was using different coloured pencils to shade those, just to give a couple of different shades of green. I'll just shuffle this over a little bit. You can see there we've got a couple of different shades of green. I've tried to make the leaves more yellower, so they kind of come up more towards the viewer, I think. Well, hopefully they come more into the foreground, and darker colours for the background, just to push that back and actually keep it in the background. But for the whole of the area, I was just doing it with the deep cream, which I think has a kind of a green tone to it, so I was using that and just working with the same colour in the background for both areas. There we go, that's the colours that I was using for my marker basing. We can see, I'll just flip us over there, the mushrooms themselves. Mushrooms here, they don't have any marker basing on the actual cap, so that's just pencil work. And before we start, I'll show you the colours that I was actually using to colour the mushroom caps. It's a combination I came up a while ago, I think when I first got my Castle Arts pencils. So I did stick with it, as it's a combination I do enjoy using. And here we are. Of course, there's the Polychromos black and the white, which seems to be a little bit of a staple now whenever I'm doing my colouring, which is why they've ended up looking so battered and bashed up there. But they still work, so we'll go with them. This is the Indian Red 025. Scarlet Red 022, we have Vermilion 023, and the Fleshlight 020, which I think makes a nice kind of reddish, maybe toning up towards the flesh colour at the top, kind of colour scheme for the mushroom caps. So I'll go ahead and show you how I was doing those. And for these mushrooms, I was working from the dark to the light, which I've said a few times is probably not a great tip to be giving, but it seems to be working for me. So I'll show you how I was doing it. If you want to work it from the light at the top to dark at the bottom, that's fine. As usual, it's just, my videos are just ideas and inspiration. You don't have to follow to the letter at all. Even myself, most of the times, I just take the colours and play with them and see what I can make happen. But anyway, here we go for the mushroom. You can see that I have drawn on, actually, before we do go on. Hopefully it's showing up on camera. I have drawn on some spots, some kind of wibbly sort of spots going on there towards the top, because all these mushrooms were plain, and it is a heck of a lot of mushrooms, even for somebody who loves to colour them. So if on a few of them, you can see over the other side, here on this one I haven't coloured, on this one here and this one here I drew on the spots, and just once I'd finished colouring I went over the pencil lines with the white gel pen, just to give a few of the mushrooms a little bit of a different look to them, make things a little bit more interesting to colour. But anyways, for the colouring, first of all I'm using the Indian Red, and I was using this very lightly, because apparently back in the day I used to layer a lot more when I did my colouring, and this is the way I got the mushrooms to look the same as they were, kind of as the ones I'd done in the past. Might not be the way that I go about it nowadays. I'm more about the blending than the layering nowadays, I think. I try to use maybe 2 or 3 layers, because that way, even if the paper isn't that great, I can usually get my little techniques working. But apparently back in the day, especially with these mushrooms, which is probably why they were taking so long, I was doing a lot of layering. And the first layer there with the Indian Red. I wasn't entirely sure if I used the actual Indian Red or the Indian Red Light. I'm thinking either of them might work. But what I have been using on these ones here is the actual Indian Red. So that's our first layer with the Indian Red. I'll just leave our pencil there. The Vermilion is actually the next darkest. And how I seem to be doing it back in the day is going over the whole of the Indian Red, and then maybe just a little bit further on with the Vermilion. So I was going over the whole of the Indian Red, the colouring we'd already got done, and adding a little bit extra with the Vermilion. Going pretty lightly, but I will be blending with the Polychromos white Although originally I was blending with the Arteza white, which is a better pencil for blending. I really need to try the Prisma white actually to see if that is any better than the Polychromos. But for now I am using the Polychromos white, mainly for the virtue that you can buy them open stock. Okay, so that is a little bit of the vermilion. The next colour is the Scarlet Red. Again, I was going over the whole area that I had coloured fairly lightly, fading off towards the top. And these layers at first, really pretty light. You can use your rounded pencil strokes if you prefer, but for quickness I was just keeping my strokes all going the same way up towards the top of the mushroom. And that way, if the pencil strokes do end up actually showing, they will look more natural, as if they're meant to be there, or so I thought in my little brain at the time. So yeah, going on with the Scarlet Red, pretty close to the top, over everything we've done before, going up pretty close to the top. Then we have the Fleshlight. And I was covering the whole area, but very, very, very light towards the very tip of the mushroom, because I wanted the very tip to be very pale. But we want all the rest of the colours to blend in. So again, I was going over the whole of the colouring I'd done before. Or apparently I was. It seemed to be the way that I'd figured out how it used to work. But we are talking like a few years ago now. I first started this, I think. Maybe even 2020 when I first started colouring this magazine. I'm not entirely sure when this one first came out, but it would have been around the same time that it came out. Okay, so that's our first little set of layers. And back to the beginning. This time maybe a little bit, pressing a little bit harder, just laying a little bit more colour down. And it was taking quite a while compared to the way that I would actually colour it now, where I try and only have a couple of layers. But that really wasn't working to match in with the mushrooms I'd done before, so this is kind of my old method of blending, which takes a bit more time. I think I've kind of adapted to maybe do things a little bit quicker, because doing things on film when they take forever is not really a very good idea. But there we go, that's another layer of the Indian Red. And then back to the vermilion, again going over all the colouring we've already done, and we're adding a little bit extra over the end of the Indian Red. A little spot there that I drew, I'm not entirely sure, but we do seem to have a spot going on there, so we'll work that in. And easing off the pressure towards the top, where we're going to be blending in the Scarlet Red. Back to the Scarlet Red. Again over everything. Easing off a little bit towards the top. And just easing off towards the top there, so we can bring in our Fleshlight. And the flesh tones in Castelots, they're kind of orangey, I think, anyways. To me they seem to be pretty orangey, so they do work pretty well with a red kind of colour combination, or to my eyes anyways. I'm not entirely sure if we should try and go for another layer there. Not sure how much pigment we do have going down. As always, you can layer as little or as much as you want to. We're having to press pretty hard now. We're going in for a third run through of our colours. I did seem to be going through and putting layers over the whole of everything I'd done before. As I have showed you, that seemed to be how I was getting it to work. Okay, that's going back to our Indian Red. Vermilion. we can see the colour is building up there. I just play with it until it's looking about right, as I've said a few times. I just pick the colours and play with them until I've got something that's looking right. So keep going until you're happy with it. I might try after this layer, maybe blending with the white and seeing what we have. There's the scarlet red. Of course, any way that you do your blending, that's, yeah, you just use that. My method of blending has changed through the years, I think. I wouldn't put so many layers nowadays. I try and keep my layers to a minimum. Which is probably why I'm struggling with using polychromos pencils. I think they are pencils that are made for lots of light layers, whereas I am more of a minimalist, I suppose, when it comes to the amount of layers. Maybe I should invest in a few Prismas and see if I get along better with those. But that's our scarlet red. And I think a final layer of this flashlight before I move on to blending with the white to see what we can get going on there. And I have avoided going into the areas, the white spots there, trying to keep those as white as possible, just so I can go around the areas there with the white gel pen. Give us a little bit of a spotty mushroom. I am pressing pretty hard now. And it is working, seeming to work with keeping these colours pretty well blended in this technique. Although I do wonder, although things, yeah, must have taken a lot longer for me to colour back in the day if this is the technique I was using. Maybe I'll show a little bit on a different mushroom, the technique that I would use nowadays. Maybe 2 layers, not going over the whole area. But this is what I was doing. And finally, we blend it all with the white polychromos. A well-used white polychromos. Originally I was blending, as I mentioned, with the Arteza white pencil, which was doing a better job of the actual blending. But from looking at it, yeah, I do think that we do seem to have a little bit of a wax build-up going on there, which seems to be dulling the colour. You might be able to see it a little bit closer. Now we have zoomed in. We'll scoot over. Yeah, we can maybe see a difference there from, these are the mushrooms I did back when this was a WIP. These are the mushrooms I did here. And these ones that are the ones that I did a couple of days ago. You can see the colours are a lot brighter there. So I think maybe we do have a little bit of a wax build up there. I don't know if I can get any light acting on there. But yeah, I think we do have a bit of a wax build up there. Wax bloom. Let's dulled the colour a little bit. But back to the mushroom that we are colouring, and we're just blending that with the white polychromos for now, and it is dulling those colours, but you can work back on top of that, on top of the white, as long as you don't press really super hard, flatten the tooth of the paper. You can work back on top. And for the very edges of the mushrooms, I was bringing in a little bit of the black just around these far edges. Just to kind of show that the mushroom is curvy. So this bit in the middle would be what's nearest to you, and these would be furthest away. We do have a little bit of shading there that maybe also indicates that that would be darker and further away. So we have a little bit of the black there. Getting back to Indian red. Just for the very edge here. And this is pressing pretty hard now, just to add a little bit more colour to it. Vermilion. I don't think you have to stick to red. No, you don't have to stick to the red. There could be shades of blue we're using here. Green, any kind of colour really. I just stuck with the traditional red, white, spotty little mushroom, toadstool kind of idea. It was fun to do. It looked good. So I figured, well, yeah, we'll go with that. Although lately I have coloured another picture of mushrooms and they were grey. Kind of glowing grey mushrooms. I did try my hand at. And that worked out pretty well. So any colour. Blue would be really good to try and do glowing mushrooms. Or green. Like a really bright neon green. There we go, we're getting there now. This colour is building up. Especially towards the top here where we don't have quite so many layers going on, we can bring in extra layers of the colour. Hopefully we are looking something like the mushrooms on the other side of the page. I seem to have maybe gone a bit heavy, more heavy-handed with this scarlet red on the mushrooms the other side of the page. That's the trouble with doing something a few days before you intend to film it. Never quite sure if you'll be able to get it looking exactly the same. But as long as we look acceptably like a mushroom. Of course, even in nature, not every single mushroom, even in a patch of mushrooms, not every single one of them is going to look exactly the same. Try a little bit more vermilion. We're pretty much maxed out the tooth there. I don't think we'll be getting a lot more layers, especially towards the bottom. This is the older Colouring Heaven paper, so it is a little bit thicker and it's probably taking a few more layers than you could probably get on the newer paper. This is back to Scarlet Red. I want to get that flesh light colour blending in as well as I can. Maybe bring in the white a little bit more. There we go. I think we're heading towards something that's looking a lot like what we have going on the other side now. That's looking not too bad. And then I would just bring in the white gel pen, my usual white gel pen, and go over these pencil lines where I drew in these spots. We have one here. There we go. We did end up with one kind of coming through our colouring there, so we'll add in a little one down there. There we go, something like that. And as you can see over the other side, I did add in my usual customary highlights to make these mushrooms look as if they might be a tiny bit shiny. So we'll add in a few little highlights along the edges. And I was bringing in along this bottom edge as well, especially where the kind of tears or damage to the cap is there. I was bringing in the white gel pen. I think that's looking sort of similar to what we have the other side, so yep, I'll go with that. And that's how I was colouring the actual mushroom caps, which will look a lot brighter once we've given it a little bit of background. For the stems of the mushrooms, I was using the Castle Art Gold pencils because I do love these warm greys from the Castle Arts Gold. I do like to use those. Of course, the Polychromos White for a little bit of blending. I have the Warm Grey, that's 161 GP. Warm Grey Light, that's 120 GP. And the Slate Grey, which is 200 GP. And I wasn't entirely sure what kind of colour stems these should actually be having. This is the warm grey, just going in with the darker kind of warm grey, giving a little bit of shading to the right side there. As usual, I've gone for having my lighting coming from the left towards the right. It seems to be the kind of direction that I default to. It's all good though, it doesn't really matter which direction you have it coming from. But I was adding, yeah, the main shadows with the warm grey. just to this stalk. And yeah, as I was saying, I wasn't quite decided what kind of colour these were supposed to be. Originally I thought maybe they should be like the kind of mushrooms, you know, the normal button mushrooms that we eat. The underside should maybe be a dark black colour, but I thought maybe that wouldn't stand out from the background so much. And yeah, it did take me quite a while to decide that this should be the warm grey, and hopefully I should be able to make that work. As this is meant to be Alice in Wonderland, I think her dress and her bow are going to be blue, so this will be the cool colours that I wanted to be standing out. So maybe I thought making the mushrooms more of the warmer greys would work a little bit better. It does seem to be working over the other side. We do have that working quite well, so I've run with it. That's just adding in a few shadows with the warm grey. We'll do this one as well, the one that we coloured the actual cap of. And it does seem to be, the outline does seem to be going through that leaf there, so I'm not sure if that leaf is supposed to be transparent or not, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll assume that it isn't, and we'll just colour it grey. Otherwise things are getting, yeah, a little bit more complicated there. Oops, maybe we should hold the paper. Just the same as we did on that other mushroom just up the top. Adding the biggest shadows underneath this little frill and down the right hand side of the mushroom stem or stalk or whatever it is called, I really don't know. And this is the warm grey light, which isn't that much difference to the actual marker. So I was using this to blend that darker grey maybe a little bit into the actual grey of the marker in the background there, just soften the edges a little bit. And onto the one that we did colour the cap. I might actually bring in a little bit of the black, I think, just to add a little bit more shading along these top edges. But we're just blending in that darker grey really more than anything. We do want the marker of the background to be showing through, so we're just blending that in very slightly. And then with this slate grey, this is more of a brown than an actual grey. So I was keeping this fairly kind of sparing because I don't want the mushrooms to be looking too brown. So we're adding teeny tiny touches of this slight grey. There we go. And then once we've given it a little bit of clean on some scrap paper, I was blending that with the white polychromos. There we go. Kind of smushing all those kind of greys together. And you can, as I've said, go in with the black to add a little bit of extra shading if you do feel it needs it in a few areas. Like right there, I think, in that little kind of dint that's come out the edge of the mushroom. Add in a tiny little bit of the black, just to be making it look a little bit more 3D, maybe here under the edge of this leaf. And you guessed it guys, white gel pen, my usual little highlights, not so much on this kind of grey areas because yeah, this is not likely to be very shiny. But a few little highlights on the edges kind of brings it out, make it look as if it is more towards the front, catching the light a little bit. And once you've done the background, that will be a lot darker, so that will make our mushrooms stand out. Yep, that is working pretty well now, I think. Okay, for the background, this is these bits here behind the mushrooms, behind the leaves. We want the leaves to be more kind of a yellowy green to make those stand out and look as if they're coming forward towards us. But for these background areas here, I was colouring those, going back to the Castle Arts, the normal Castle Arts pencils now. I was using the Terra Verde Deep and the Terra Verde, that is 104 and 064. And with the Terra Verde Deep, I was going around the edges of these kind of background areas and kind of fading off my pressure as I'm coming into the middle of the area a little bit. This is quite a nice deep kind of dark green. It's pretty desaturated, so pretty good for backgrounds, I found anyways. I like to use the yellowy greens for anything that I want to be kind of coming forward, but anything that's in the background, I try and use the nice desaturated greens. Going on to the Terra Verde now. Going over the green we've already done, coming out a little bit further into the actual area of the background. And for any areas of the background that are pretty big, I think I did it over in this area here. If you can see that one on camera. I could maybe bring in a little bit of a more yellowy green just to show that there is varieties of colours kind of in the leaf litter there we've got going on in the background. So maybe a tiny little bit oxide of chrome. This is 063. Maybe a tiny little suggestion of that, kind of more towards the middle of the area. Then blending that with the white polychromos as per usual, but any method of blending or even leave as is, don't need to blend at all. Personal preference. And then if we feel we do need more shadows, polychromos black. There we go. I'll just blend that black in with some more of the Terra Verde Deep. And there we go. That's for the darker areas of the background. That's what I had working there. I'll just fill in this little area here and maybe that one, just with exactly the same kind of method. And I do love colouring mushrooms, like I said at the beginning, or mushrooms, toadstools. I think this kind of colour scheme is fly agaric, isn't it? Something along those lines, but it's just a colour that I do like to use for any kind of mushrooms or toadstools, because I think you just instantly recognise that, don't you, as being the traditional kind of toadstool mushroom colour. Just to make this mushroom here stand out, show how the dark background helps with making those mushrooms stand out. We'll do a little bit, couple of other little bits of background around there. And hope I don't get too carried away. I can't really today because my phone battery isn't that great. I forgot to charge it overnight, so we don't have a full charge of battery. So I'm hoping we can get most of this recorded before my phone dies. I'll just finish up this little bit of background here, so that once I've done these leaves, maybe that will give you some idea how I was getting the whole kind of effect in general that is going on the other side. And it will be a long journey to complete the whole background of this picture. I think that is what was putting me off originally from going back to this W.I.P. All these areas of mushrooms we have going on in the background, but yeah, I had forgotten how much I do love colouring them. And doing the background in the marker, laying down the base of the marker, that does help kind of tremendously really with well, once you've got the area kind of coloured with the base, it doesn't look quite so intimidating for a start, and it's a heck of a lot quicker just to add a couple of layers of pencil on top of the marker than to go ahead and do like 5 or 6 was it layers we ended up doing on the mushrooms. Very time consuming, and I think because I was fixing on doing the whole picture with the pencils, because this is before I had my big set of ahoo-hoos. Well, it's not the biggest set that they do, but it's a pretty big set to me, and at least. And yeah, I was fixing on doing the whole thing with colour pencils, so it was totally putting me off. Although watercolour might have been interesting and a lot quicker. But I do love to colour mushrooms in pencil, so there's that to it. There we go. That's showing up quite nicely. For the leaves, I did mix my pencils a little bit for these bits of leaves we've got going on here. I did mix my pencils. I did bring in the Arteza, the moss green there, that's A029. This one is just called moss, that's from my old set, but I think now it's called moss green. This is the chrome green from Castle Arts. I think that's it could be 053, that one. I'll have to look up that number. Polychromos black, and this is the Arteza cream A100. And this is actually the watercolor pencil because I couldn't get the actual colored pencil in the open stock, but they were selling the watercolor pencil, so we're going to go with that one. You could use the cream from the Arteza or any kind of cream, maybe yellowish colored pencil. But I'll show you how I was doing those leaves. I was going in with the chrome green for the main bits of the shadows, and this is a more yellower green than we were using in the background, slightly more saturated. So that makes these leaves look as if they are coming forward. And the green of the leaves does give a nice contrast to the red that we've got going on with our mushrooms. I was keeping this chrome green towards the middles of the leaves, keeping it quite dark in the middle, going over that a few times, tapering out towards the outside, using these marks of the kind of veins in the leaves to give me some kind of basis of where the shadows will be going. I'm going to give some shadow behind where the leaf is curling up there. We do have a hat coming over here. I think we'll be putting that in with white gel pen probably once we've actually gone in. I was thinking of making her blonde like a traditional Alice in Wonderland. Although I may change my ideas. I do change my ideas fairly often. I am pretty fickle like that. This is the moss green from Arteza. Trying to blend that into the chrome green. Go out towards the edges of the leaf. This is kind of the method that I use for colouring my ivy leaves. That I do also love to colour, although I would have based it with a more yellowy cream if it was an ivy leaf. But this is the method that I do kind of use for the ivy leaves. Keep the cream around the edges. So, and then for the outer areas, the cream. Kind of using it a little bit to blend those greens together. As you can see there, that is my method of blending that I do seem to use now. Just a couple of layers like that and then blend. Pressing fairly hard instead of trying to go in with all the light layers, which yeah, is probably why I don't really get on with the polychromos pencils. I do struggle quite a bit with using the polychromos pencils. But yeah, that's how I was working with those leaves. Maybe add a little bit of a kind of shadow there underneath where that leaf is coming up. And we can go in with the black and define any shadows that we think are needing it. I'm not going for total realism. If I was going for more realism, then yeah, it wouldn't be a black I was using for shadows, but this is fairly sketchy and not super realistic, so especially not with my little cartoon spots on these mushrooms. So I'm totally not going with realism. I'm going to bring in the white there just to try and blend that a little bit more towards the edges. Playing with my colours again. There we are, and there's leaves. A lot yellower, more towards the foreground. It's not complete without white gel pen highlights, right? But again, on the leaves, very, very slight because the leaves are actually not, they're not shiny, so we don't need to be bringing those right the way out. And we can see now there how that mushroom is standing out with the darker, less saturated green in the background, which would also be over this side. We have the yellower green on the leaves there, making those more kind of standing out more and more towards the foreground. And we have the nice bright red mushrooms. That's standing out. I think maybe the contrast with the green is helping along with that quite a lot. And because the saturated colour, or as saturated as I could get it with that method of layering and blending, just filling in this background there, with the mushroom stems being light as well. They do stand out from the darker colour of the background, even though they are less of a saturated colour, but yeah, they are standing out quite nicely there. And there we go, that's how I was colouring the mushrooms. I can show you how I would attempt or go ahead to do the blending these days. These days I would press a little bit harder to start with. I wouldn't go in with all the light layers. And this mushroom is now really going to stand out in my picture as looking different, I suppose, but yeah, as I said, every mushroom is different anyways. You don't all grow the same. This is nature. Nothing is ever all the same in nature. Okay, I would go ahead quite dark towards the edges, kind of tapering off towards where I want my next colour to be blending in. And I would go more for a blending kind of technique rather than a layering technique. So next I would bring in the vermilion, which is the next darkest colour, and just try and blend that in to where the darker red was coming. I would probably do a couple of layers, but not going over all that I've done before, as we were doing with the original mushroom I showed you. Keeping this area here at the top, kind of circular area, that's where we're going to bring in our flesh colour, the flesh light, and the white kind of highlight at the top of the mushroom. So as you can see, the colours, yeah, I'm pressing a lot harder. There's a lot more colour going down on my first kind of pass at this. The same colours in the same order. This one would be the scarlet red. We go Indian red, vermilion, scarlet red, and then flesh light. I think that was the best one of the flesh colours that worked the best for doing it. Although you could go from flesh dark to flesh light if you wanted to bring in another little colour blend, but this is how I was doing it. And because I'm kind of tapering off with my pressure as I'm coming up towards where the colours would be blending, they're blending pretty well. Maybe not as well as if I did do the kind of layering technique down there. And there's not as much pigment on the paper, but then there's not as much colour build up, especially down this bottom area here, which is the problem I ended up having, that I couldn't really put as much colour on because we had gone over the same area at least 5 or 6 times. And this method I've kind of adapted to be quicker, I think. It does seem to work out a lot quicker than putting in all the different layers. I'm not super patient. I have to admit, I'm not super patient. I want the results, so anything that makes it a little bit quicker, I will try my best to work that way. I think the results not too different, to be honest. I think the colours probably ended up looking a little bit more vibrant. Maybe because of the fact that I was going over and over the same colour with each lighter one in turn. So you can see that these colours are turning out to be a lot brighter than the other mushroom there that I showed you. This is scarlet red. Yeah, the colour's a lot brighter. It's a lot quicker. A little bit lazy, I suppose you could say, but yeah, it's the way that I've kind of started working now, just to be quicker. Once I have ideas, I want to get them cranked out as quickly as possible. So I've started working this method, and I am going over the original colouring I've done there just a little bit, but not as much as in the first method I showed you. This is the flesh colour, flashlight. There we go, and then blend with the white. There we go. That's basically how I would go about trying to do the same kind of mushrooms nowadays. Slightly different method. I think the results are pretty much the same, except these colours are turning out a lot brighter. You can see the difference a little bit more over this side, because this method is how I coloured the first mushroom when I first picked up the magazine, and we can see the difference. Hopefully the camera is picking it up. A difference between the colours of those two mushrooms. If I could bring it up a little bit closer there. Yeah, there is a difference. These ones are a lot brighter. You can kind of tell between these two on this side that the colour is a little bit different, but the method is quicker, kind of brighter. Gives you the same sort of results. Obviously you could take a bit more care with it. This is real quick, just on the end of this video. As a little side note that, yeah, this is how I would do it nowadays. That is how I actually did it back in the past when I did start this work in progress. So I'm trying to keep to the same kind of method, to keep the colours pretty much the same. It would look a little bit obvious if these mushrooms were all the same and then everything else was a lot brighter. So I've tried to keep to the method I used originally with the slightly duller colours. And there we go, that's how I was colouring my mushrooms. I'll zoom us back out now so we can see the whole of the picture. There we go, we're back to pretty much the whole picture there. As I said, you can see there is a very slight colour difference between these original mushrooms that I coloured and the ones that I've gone ahead and done quite recently. I don't think it'll be too noticeable once the whole picture is actually done, because I think, yeah, the character will be the main focus of the picture. So I'm going to try and make sure that that is where you originally look when you first look at the picture. So the background will be the background, fingers crossed, with a bit of luck. But that was how I was colouring them, if I'm remembering rightly. And this little one here is how I would colour it these days, just for quickness more than anything else. This is the method I did used to use. That's the closest I could get my colours looking to these mushrooms here. But I think, yeah, adding to the fact that I did use the Arteza pencil to blend those, I think a little bit of wax bloom has gone through there, and I think the white was overlaying quite a lot onto those as well. So these colours would be a little bit brighter, even without the blending method being a little bit different. But all in all, yeah, I think that's working pretty well for those mushrooms, so I will go ahead and finish that one off. If I have actually done that before I've actually got the video edited and popped up on YouTube, I will pop that picture in here. So thank you for watching, everybody. I have been meaning for absolutely ages to do a video showing my colour combination that I do use for mushrooms. The colours were the same, even though my blending and layering methods may have changed slightly through the years. Those were the colours I use. So feel free to take the idea, run with it, substitute your own colours, and have some fun colouring some mushrooms, because they're one of the things that I really, really do enjoy colouring. So thank you so much for watching, everybody. Hopefully you've enjoyed coming along with me as I show you how I colour my mushrooms. If you have enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you in future videos. Bye!